Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. I don't know if anyone else is going to show up, but really the purposes of this are so that we have a recording. So we are in the Rules Council that we have just recently formed. We are going to be issuing rulings for various portions of the Lord of the Rings trading card game. There are two separate teams, as we announced. We've got the Legacy Rules team that is going to be issuing rulings for Decipher formats, and the Modern Rules team that will be issuing rulings for PC formats. For the most part, these two teams should work pretty hand in hand, but obviously the Legacy team doesn't need to worry themselves too much about new and upcoming cards. They're more concerned with making sure that the old game continues to work the way that it always did. So we are just gonna go. So yeah, we're gonna go over all this. So this particular blog post should be linked in the description. I'm not actually going to be reading from here because this is more of a summary. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to go over all the individual issues here. These three different concerns or questions that needed to be gone over. I'm going to go over all the evidence for the different sides, and then we're going to go over the actual ruling that the council itself made. So I'm going to hop over here to the wiki, which is actually the primary place that we keep all of our ruling information. There are some tables here, and you can go to the Rules Council page, and that will give you an overview of what exactly we're going to be doing. To give a brief summary here, the idea with this Rules Council is that we are going to be maintaining 3 different versions of the rulebook. Those of you that are Decipher Old Guard may remember the Comprehensive Rules 4.0, which was made about 3 years before the game went out of print. We have consolidated every piece of information that we could find from all official sources into a single document called the Comprehensive Rules 4.1. There's no alterations in here. This is purely just everything that they ever said all in one page, so that you don't have to go hunting down a bunch of different documents. And so the Legacy Rules team will be maintaining this. If we discover, that there's a ruling or something that slipped the cracks, we'll add it back in and keep it maintained. But most of the time, this particular document should not be changing. However, the Comprehensive Rules 4.2 is the document that the Legacy team is going to be most concerned with. I've got it marked here as Community Rules. This should be where we put all of our all the new rulings that we make. We're going to add them in line into the document itself. So if you're just looking for one document that has all the current rulings all in one place, as what in line with all of the rules as they stood, this will be a good place to go. This is going to be the document that GEMP is going to be referring to moving forward. So whenever there's a particular dispute over this card should work that way or should work this way, and there's a concern, it'll go before the Legacy Rules team. Then, like a ruling, they'll update this document, and then we will update GEMP to follow whatever is in the document. And then there's the Comprehensive Rules 5.0, because the PC formats, the Players Council formats, are slowly but surely diverging. There are new things that we're adding in, things like multipath. There's terminology that we're adding. So far, we just really have the word item, I think, is one of the things. But we're in the foreseeable future, we will be adding new mechanics. We will be adding new site paths. There are some other card types and things that we're looking to add in, and so all of those concepts are going to require that we have our own set of rules that takes all those things and puts them all, once again, just in one place for us to be able to have as a reference. And so this is what is going to be controlling how the PC formats work. Now, by and large, I expect that as we make rulings here in the Comprehensive Rules 4.2, those same changes will be flowing into the Comprehensive Rules 5.0, because for the sorts of questions that the Legacy Rules team takes a look at, I don't expect that the PC will diverge too much from that. But yeah, so the process that we have constructed here, that we are still trying to figure out the details on, is what we have here on screen is the rules review process that we're going to be going through. So first, any player can submit a question. We already had a backlog of questions that people have submitted in the past, and we were able to look at various things that we've argued about in the past, and looked through the last Homely House for things that people have argued over for the last decade. So we have a small backlog, but if anyone has a particular question, they can, of course, submit it. And then we have an internal process whereby our rules team, depending on whether it's the Legacy team or the Modern team, will be going through a round of discussions and voting on what specifically we're going to be doing. And then after that point, we will then publish those rulings for public review. And that is what we're doing today. We are releasing the public review for the first 3 rulings that the Legacy team is doing. And then after we have received public feedback, because there may very well be, some obscure blog post that we had no idea existed, or somebody may be able to point to an obscure forum thread somewhere where some designer popped in and said something like, we're hoping to crowdsource, some of that information, and that may be very relevant to how exactly we make our rulings. But then after we've done the public review, then we will go through the process of updating the rulebook and enacting the ruling, which for the most part means updating GEMP to actually enforce whatever the ruling change is. And so down here you can see that there are links to all of the individual rulings. This is where we actually keep all of our information as we are discussing these items. So you can actually see some of the ones in the future are already filled in. So if you are interested in what we're going to be talking about, you can take a look there. But today we're just going to be looking at number 1, 2, and 3 here. So Legacy ruling number 1, we are looking at Shadowfax Greatest of the Mieris. So this particular card is one that people have argued about how exactly it's supposed to work pretty much since it's been released. This is a card from set 17, which to those of you just tuning in, set 17 and 18 had a very fraught development cycle. We have heard that Decipher had been reduced to practically only being able to allocate 1 person to work on Lord of the Rings during this time. So it was 1 person under an enormous workload. So things slipped the cracks because 1 person was doing the job of a dozen. And so the issue here, if we read just the first section here, the Fellowship ability there does not matter. Shadowfax reads, Bearer must be a Gandalf wizard, Gandalf culture wizard. Discard all other possessions on Bearer, and Bearer may not bear a hand weapon. So the problem with this, if it doesn't leap out to you immediately, is that there are 2 different ways that you can read this. You can either read it as, when you play Shadowfax, once, discard all other possessions on Bearer. So a one-time discard event. The other way you can read it is, while you can spot Shadowfax, continually discard all other possessions on Bearer. And the card doesn't give us a whole lot of hints as to how exactly that is supposed to be read. So this is something that has been discussed ever since the card has been released. It's not something that is new. So we were able to go into a bunch of old threads and find a bunch of evidence that people have given one way or the other. So let's go over some of those. So first, the one that you might think of immediately when you're thinking of this card is the Balrog Durin's Bane, because it in fact has a permanent discard effect. And this one is worded, while you can spot the Balrog, discard all other minions. So that's very similar. However, it includes the explicit while you can spot the Balrog section. Now, my argument personally is that particular clause is likely redundant. And it was likely included on the Balrog specifically because it was a promo that was released in a magazine initially. The promo version of this card was printed and sent out to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in a magazine. And so they had to make sure that it was readable and understandable to somebody that had no exposure to the game except for this one card. So I sort of understand being a little more conservative and trying to make sure that the meaning is way more understandable and normal, even if it means that your wording is a little bit redundant. Because this is going to be your ambassador, right? Anybody that sees this card, it may be the first card that they see. But it does in fact include the preamble, while you can spot the Balrog. So another major card to look at that is important while trying to understand Shadowfax is Anduril. Anduril follows a particular templating that it is pretty obvious that Shadowfax was copying. So here at the top it says, Bearer must be Aragorn, discard other weapons he bears, he's damage +1, which doesn't matter, and cannot bear other weapons. So if we hop back over to Shadowfax, we'll see, discard all of the possessions on Bearer, and Bearer may not bear a hand weapon. So we have that same sort of 2-part defense, right? Discard other weapons, cannot bear other weapons. The big difference between Anduril and Shadowfax is that Anduril uses other weapons in both clauses, right? Whereas in Shadowfax, we have discard all the other possessions, and then the second clause is bearer may not bear a hand weapon. 2 different things that it is targeting. So, interestingly enough, Anduril has the exact same ambiguity issue in that we don't actually know if this discard other weapons he bears part, if that means a one-time discard when you play it, or a continual discard so long as it's in play. But the difference is that because of the way that these two clauses work with each other, because they are targeting the exact same type of card, it actually doesn't matter. Like if we consider for a moment that let's assume that this is discard when you play. So you initially discard all other weapons, and then after that point, you cannot bear anymore. So you're permanently going to be in a situation where other weapons cannot be played on Aragorn. Now let's consider the other case, where we have discard other weapons he bears so long as you can spot Anduril. Well, same thing. All those other weapons get discarded the moment you play it, and then no more can be played on him because of the second clause. So they operate the same way, and so the ambiguity doesn't really matter. It doesn't come back to bite us at all. This particular templating was first seen, I think, on Hearken to Me, which follows a very similar pattern. So you have this discard all shadow conditions on Theoden, and then shadow conditions may not be played on Theoden. Now this actually did leave a little bit of a gap, because playing a card directly is not the only way that you can put a card on somebody. You can transfer them as well, and I believe that was an issue that came up that they may have had to issue a clarification for to plug that little gap. But by the time Anduril came around, which is 3 sets later, they had figured out how to word it so that particular hole didn't exist, by saying not that you can't play other weapons on him, but saying that he cannot bear other weapons. So it seems it's looking pretty clear that is probably the templating that they were copying up here. Discard all of the possessions on bearer, and bearer may not bear a hand weapon rather than a possession. And then because of the fact that we are in set 17 and 18, the ones that are fraught and with the one guy that has to do all this work himself, it's very possible that he just got them mixed up and, messed something up while he was copy pasting some text. But let's take a look at a couple of other cards. So there's another card from set 18 around that same time called Disarmed that actually has an improved version of this templating. So this says bearer cannot bear any shadow cards. When this condition is transferred to bearer, discard all shadow cards it bears. So you'll notice that this does not have the ambiguity. This actually specifies that in this particular case, this one is on transfer and not a continual effect. So that's an example of how it could have been done. At any rate, so now we get to Watcher in the Water, and the interesting thing about the Watcher in the Water is that there are two different versions of it. One from way back in set 2, and then another from set 19. Both of them, we think, operate the same way, but they use different ways of saying it. So we have the set 2 Watcher here. It says, while you can spot Watcher in the Water, discard all other minions except tentacles. And you'll notice that is almost identical to the particular wording that is used with the Balrog, just with the tentacle exception. And then we have set 19 here that says, discard all other minions except tentacles. Which just kind of shows, you don't really need that while you can spot this card. Because of course, if this card is in play, then the card works, right? You don't have to say while you can spot this on everything you do. That was really just kind of a redundancy that I think for space reasons was eliminated here, but to be honest, I don't think that it was really necessary in the first place. But so why do we care, right? How you read this has just one ramification on how exactly Shadowfax gets played. So in the first case, let's imagine a situation where you have a Gandalf and he's bearing some other possession besides Shadowfax. Let's say that it's his pipe, right? We got Gandalf's pipe on Gandalf. And if we assume that this reads as when you play, so you do a one-time discard, while Gandalf is bearing his pipe, you then play Shadowfax. He does a one-time discard and discards the pipe. And then, immediately afterwards, you can play the pipe again. Because it's not a continual effect, right? So, I have to ask, why? Why would we play like that? That it nukes the other possessions and then makes you replay them, or replay other copies of them. There really doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to that particular way that it can be played. And then you've got the second way of reading it, which is if it's a continuous discard, then you will not actually be able to play any pipes on him again. So if you play Shadowfax, it immediately discards the other pipes, and then if you attempt to play a pipe again, because if we're reading this as continually discard all other possessions on bearer, then the moment you attempt to play a pipe, it immediately gets discarded. And that seems a little more consistent with what exactly is being done here, right? That the reason that you're not allowed to bear other things is, well, mostly because it's Shadowfax. From the very first incarnation of Shadowfax, there were various limitations trying to restrict Gandalf from bearing other weapons. I believe that this is about the only version that actually cares about possessions in particular, but Shadowfax does have a long history of trying to cut Gandalf down a little bit so that he doesn't get too big with a bunch of different items on him. And then the other thing is that if we assume that it is a perpetual discard, the only thing that this second clause then is doing in that case is, in theory, ensuring that he also cannot bear an artifact version of Glamdring. Because if we ensure that, okay, discard all the possessions on bearer, all versions of Glamdring that are valid for Gandalf to hold are possessions, and so they're already covered by this. And so I think the argument that some people made in the past is that, well, for this to matter at all, for the distinction between possessions and hand weapons to matter, it must mean that the hand weapon isn't necessarily so you can replay the other possessions, but the hand weapons are not. And so there's kind of this halfway interaction, right, where possessions get ditched, but you can bring other things back, but not the hand weapon, right? And this, yeah, well, so the first thing that I want to address here is that it's highly unlikely that the way that this is written is actually reflecting the intent of the designer. Obviously, we don't necessarily know what was going on in their head, but taking a look at the gameplay, like we established, whether or not this works by perpetually keeping things off or doing this sort of halfway, well, you can lose your possessions, but then get them back later. It doesn't really seem that either one of these are perfectly reflecting what the designer intended. I think it's much more likely that this was half a copy-paste error. They started to change it both to hand weapon, or maybe both started as hand weapon and then they started to change it to possession. There's not really a way to know why it landed here, but it's pretty clear that this is kind of incoherent and does not actually reflect anything intentionally designed. So with that in mind, so another thing that I do want to look at as we go through these, the precedent on old discussions from the last Homely House, it's pretty all over the place. Individuals would come to agreements in individual threads, but then in the next thread they'd be right back to the old disagreement. So there's not really a consensus to look at. And then within GEMP itself, funnily enough, so GEMP just recently went through what we've been calling the Grand Card rework, where about 2,000 cards were rewritten in a new language. And previously, before the Grand Card rework, GEMP followed the continuous discard reading, but then when the cards were rewritten, they now follow the when you play reading. So GEMP is no help here in trying to identify exactly how it should be read. And so the question that was brought before the Rules Council was, do we adhere to the 2009 community ruling? So one of the major threads does seem to have a decent number of people saying, yeah, you should do it this way, but it really kind of went still back and forth even within this particular thread. So that was why that was worded that way. So do we say that Shadowfax is a when you play one-time discard, or do we say that Shadowfax is a continuous discard? And the ruling that the Legacy team has opted for is option B, the continuous discard. So we are going to be adding a new entry to the Comprehensive Rules 4.2 that will read as such. This card continuously discards all possessions on its bearer. Possessions may still be played on or transferred to bearer, but they will immediately be discarded once attached. And the reasoning for this is that the gameplay consistency of option B is the main factor. Option A leads to an unintuitive back and forth where possessions are discarded yet allowed to be replayed. The continuous discard option consistently takes them off and keeps them off. As part of the rollout of this ruling, the PC errata of this card will be updated to align with this interpretation. And what that's referring to is that one of the PC errata that we have issued in the past, incidentally, was affecting the Fellowship ability, which was turned into an each time trigger. But while we were there, we were like, well, we may as well take a stand here, and we happened to take the other stance in this case because that was not really reviewed. It was more of a, hey, let's just pick one, right? And so that was thrown out without a whole lot of discussion. So we are going to be issuing a second version of this errata that will switch it from the discrete one-time discard to the continuous discard. All right, and that's ruling number 1. So let's go on to ruling number 2. So skirmish end status of removed characters. So what this is referring to is in the Comprehensive Rules 4.0, in the skirmish phases section, there is an area that talks about what happens to characters that are removed from their skirmish early. So what this is talking about is if you have a minion and a companion playing up against each other, and they're assigned to a skirmish, and you go to play the skirmish, but then something happens where the character dies or is discarded or returned to hand, or anything that is not actually getting to the point where you are adding up the strength and changing the and making sure that the skirmish has been resolved. If you're not actually getting to that point where the strength is being compared, then that character is considered to be removed from the skirmish. And so here we see in the Comprehensive Rules 4.0, it says a losing character is any character on the losing side in the skirmish when it resolves. Also, any character removed during his or her skirmish is a losing character. So what that means is they're saying that if that character is discarded or killed or anything else before the skirmish ends, that character is considered to be a losing character. And they give us an example. So we have Boromir bearing Blade of Gondor, which gives him the ability to exert himself to wound an orc or an Uruk-hai he's skirmishing. He faces 2 Uruk-hai who each have only 1 vitality remaining. Boromir exerts once to use the blade and kills one of the Uruk-hai. That Uruk-hai, which was removed from the skirmish early because he died, is considered a losing character. If that surviving Uruk-hai goes on to win the skirmish, Boromir will be a losing character, and that second Uruk-hai will be a winning character. And so what this is trying to establish is that just because one side wins the skirmish does not mean that everybody that was involved with the skirmish automatically wins, right? So if somebody gets removed, they're considered a loser, even if their companions go on and eventually end up winning, right? Straightforward enough. And in fact, this was the logic the GIMP was coded against. That's just as a note. However, in the current rulings document that was dated June 17th, 2005, the following section that was added to indicate that they had made a ruling on this, and they had altered what they were going to do. So now, if a character is removed from his or her skirmish and there are still 1 or more characters on each side of that skirmish, the removed character is neither a losing nor a winning character. And so this changes how that killed Uruk-hai works, right? So in the example, we can say that Boromir exerts once to use the blade and kills one of the Uruk-hai. That Uruk-hai is neither a losing nor a winning character, right? Okay, so this changes things, obviously. So the reason that we got to this point, actually, was because somebody went and reported a bug in which there was a dwarf bearing a dwarven axe that went up against 2 orcs. So we can see here on Dwarven Axe that it says each time a player's minion loses a skirmish to bearer, that player discards the top card from his draw deck. Uh-oh, somebody's mentioning something about the stream being bad. Let me... Okay, well, I'm able to hear it. Okay, well, I'm able to hear it. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Muck, if you're not able to see that stream. Actually, let me go ahead and share my screen here on Discord. I'm sorry. And that way you can see and hear what's going on over here. Should have gotten all this set up before, of course, but what can I do? All right, that should be streaming for you now here on Discord. All right, where was I? Okay, so we have a situation actually that was very, very similar to the example here, where Boromir was up against 2 Uruk-hai, but instead in this particular issue, in this particular bug, we have Gimli bearing a dwarven axe that was up against 2 orcs. And one of those orcs was killed early, so they were, of course, removed from the skirmish. But then the dwarf lost the skirmish against the remaining minions. So that was exactly the situation here. But instead of Boromir, it's a dwarf, and instead of 2 Uruk-hai, it's 2 orcs. And then the bug that was reported was that Dwarven Axe was treating the killed minion as having lost and discarded cards from the top of the deck. Now, this is actually correct according to the 4.0 version of the rules. that any character removed from his or her skirmish is a losing character. Since that character lost, Dwarven Axe triggered by a minion losing a skirmish, and so that's that. However, upon investigation, that's when we found that, hey, there's this current rulings document that actually overrules that and changes it to neither a losing nor a winning skirmish. They neither win nor lose the skirmish. And so it was me that did this. I looked at it and I was like, okay, well, that's obviously something that we should change. And I went in and fixed it and made it so that after a skirmish is resolved, it no longer broadcasts the win and loss for a character that was removed. But then we immediately started to get more bugs. So we had one person, for instance, that played New Errand, which here states something, strength +2. If that minion loses this skirmish, you may wound a minion. So this is looking specifically at a minion that you are, sorry, I should read all this out loud. Spot a ring-bound man to make a minion's sight number +2. If that minion loses this skirmish, you may wound a minion. So obviously it cares about whether or not that particular minion loses a skirmish. But then they transferred Citadel of the Stars to him, which gives a -1 vitality, and that was enough to kill the minion. Well, the minion was no longer considered to have won or lost, so since it did not win the skirmish, did not lose the skirmish, because it was neither a winner nor a loser, then the person who played New Errand was not able to play that particular, or not able to wound an additional minion. And then we also had another situation where somebody had Sudden Fury that states each time a Shire companion loses a skirmish, add a Shire token here. Then you later use those tokens to boost them. And they used Merry Learned Guide, which can exert the Ring Bearer to discard Merry. Discarding Merry will, of course, cause him to leave the skirmish. And now that he is leaving the skirmish, he's no longer being considered a winner nor a loser, he did not trigger Sudden Fury over here, which only looks for a losing character. So, how do we fix this? How do we figure out what exactly is going to be going on? If we look through the rules, we'll see this other section here that says if all characters of one side are removed during a skirmish before the strength has been totaled, then the skirmish resolves and the other side wins. So that tells us what happens when all of them are removed. We know for sure that if for instance, if we were in this situation with Boromir and the 2 Uruk-hai, if he were to use his ability to on the sword to kill both Uruk-hai, then he would be the winner. But the question that we still have is, would the second guy be considered a loser or not? Because we know that the first one is not considered a losing nor a winning character. But what about the guy that he kills with his sword the last time? The very last character that gets removed from a skirmish before it gets canceled. That's really the gap that we found ourselves in, is that the rules didn't actually specify what exactly happens to that sort of character. So we went over it, and CCJ, who is now himself on the Rules Council, found this old article actually from Decipher that happens to comment on this particular issue. So this is just a deck tech, and we'll find in here that it specifically mentions with Sudden Fury, you can take advantage of all the hobbits you've discarded. Note that if you discard your hobbit from a skirmish, you still lose that skirmish. So this pretty clearly seems to lay out in black and white that Decipher intended that to work. Sadly, it did not necessarily be a slam dunk for us, because this was dated February 10th, 2005, and that rule change was in June 17th, 2005. So it is possible that, the rule change was just, it came afterwards. So what we have here next on the wiki, we've got a list of all the different cards that interact with losing characters and in a skirmish. And so this is the scope, right, of all the different cards that would be affected by this. So the big question in particular is, so we know for a fact, based on the rules, these facts. We know that being removed from a skirmish before that skirmish resolves cancels it and results in no winners or losers if you are the last Oh, yes. So, yeah, this is before the skirmish resolves. So if this were to happen during the assignment phase, or if this were to happen during someone else's skirmish, and all the characters are removed, then it cancels and there's no winners, no losers, which makes sense. The skirmish is not currently ongoing. If you remove an excess character, like the second Uruk-hai, from one side of a skirmish, then that results in that removed character being neither a winner nor a loser. And if you remove all opponents of a character, then that results in the guy not removed winning the skirmish. So all that's left is deciding what happens to the very last removed character during an active skirmish. And so the two choices basically are that the final character of a particular side being removed loses, or they neither win nor lose. What we have opted to do is that we have decided to go for option A, which is to restore the ability for things like Mary to discard himself and then trigger Sudden Fury again. Because it seems pretty obviously that was the intent. There was just a little bit of a gap in the definition of the rules here. So we are going to be altering that section of skirmish phases. We're going to be adding these new parts in bold. A character removed from his, or well, actually it's going to be replacing the sentence that was there before. A character removed from his or her skirmish is a losing character, unless there are still one or more characters on each side of that skirmish, in which case the removed character is neither a losing nor a winning character. And so all this does is just set it in stone that the very last character removed is a loser, but everyone before them that is removed before they are is neither a winning nor a losing character. And then we just alter the example here. So if Boromir exerts to use the blade a second time and wounds the second Uruk-hai, then Boromir will be the winning character and that second Uruk-hai will be a losing character because they were the last ones removed from the skirmish. The initial behavior of the last removed character being a losing character appears to have been intentional for interacting with the likes of Sudden Fury. The later addition of the neither winning nor losing section seems to make the most sense as only applying to additional characters in a skirmish as a means of avoiding the very issue with Dwarven Axe above. So, all right, so that is that for that particular one. Let's see. Now we're on to number 3, so this will be the last ruling that we're doing today. And this one is going to be Mount Doom. So Mount Doom is very straightforward in its text. It says, until the end of the game, sites in this region cannot be replaced. And if you're not familiar with expanded parlance, region refers to a block of 3 cards, of 3 sites rather. So sites 1, 2, and 3 are region 1. Sites 4, 5, and 6 are region 2. Sites 7, 8, and 9 are region 3. And so this is saying that you cannot you cannot replace Mount Doom, and you cannot replace the cards that are in the same region as that, so up to 2 other cards. This seems straightforward. You know, what could possibly go wrong here? Well, the way that GEMP currently implements this dovetails with an argument that has been made, and we are going to interrogate what exactly is going on here. So, as the argument goes, if you play Mount Doom on a site that is not the one that the Fellowship is currently inhabiting, so for instance, you can use Traveled Leader that says spot a Gandalf Culture Wizard to replace a site in the Fellowship's current region with a site from your adventure deck, so that doesn't have to be the site you're at. You can also use One Good Turn Deserves Another, or Pathfinding, or one of these other types of cards that plays a site plays the next site, the one that you are not yet at. And so it argues that if you do this, the cannot be replaced game text does not kick in until the Fellowship has physically stepped on the site. So let's take a look and see why they've come to this conclusion. So if you take a look at the active section in the comprehensive rules, it states that during your turn, only these cards in play are active, including sites on the adventure path, as well as a bunch of other stuff. All other cards in play are inactive. Inactive cards are not affected by the game and do not affect the game, blah, blah, blah. So, but the important part is sites are active, okay? Next section, sites are always active. A site's game text cannot be used unless the Fellowship is there, although some sites may copy and use that game text. So as an example, it says if the game text of a site has a shadow special ability, you may use that special ability only when the active Fellowship is at that site and you are a shadow player. So this way you can't just utilize every single site that's active, right? If you're on site 9, you don't have 9 sites worth of stuff that you can access. It's just the site that you are currently at. And so the argument goes, so the main thing here is right here. Sites are always active, but a site's game text cannot be used unless the Fellowship is there. Now, game text is defined, but used is not. It doesn't describe what exactly it means for game text to be used. And so the argument is that since Mount Doom has not yet been stepped on, there's no player there, that we cannot use this text until the end of the game. Sites in this region cannot be replaced. And so therefore, if Mount Doom is played at an alternate position where the Fellowship has not yet come to, then the game text is not actually in force, meaning that that site, in fact, can be replaced. Okay? So, personally, I think that there's a few problems with this. Number one, that because used is ill-defined, just because used is not defined, that doesn't necessarily mean that it behaves like that, right? Um, which is the trouble, of course, with the rulebook. When you go through it, there's a number of things that are not defined, and so you have to sort of invent your own meaning for what used happens to mean. But so, for instance, one example of how this particular how this breaks down in particular is with something like Lost in the Woods. Lost in the Woods specifically says for each ring wraith minion skirmishing bearer is strength +1 for each forest site you can spot. So how does that? Why does that matter? Well, because game text is actually defined in the rulebook. This includes all the text in the box below the card type line, except for helper text, lore, collector's info, and marketing text. Any bold-faced keyword that appears in this box, such as Easterling, Fierce, or Defender +1, is game text. So that means that those bold-faced terms here, like Battleground, Mountain, and Underground on Mount Doom, that's game text. And so if we pull this logic to the hilt, right, and we say that this game text cannot be used unless a player is there, then that really kind of seems to suggest that Lost in the Woods doesn't work, right? Like, you're not able to use the game text, you're not able to use those keywords. That seems problematic. But anyway, so the argument is gone that should still be the way that Mount Doom is processed. Other people say that, well, as soon as you play it, as soon as it's on the adventure path, it's now locked in place and nothing else happens. And so here we kind of realize that what's really being asked here is that there are two separate questions. The first is, how does Mount Doom actually behave? Like, if we step away for a minute from the ramifications of what's in the rules, what is the intent here? Like, how is it supposed to play? And it seems pretty obvious, at least to me, that if it says that, sites in this region cannot be replaced, that means they cannot be replaced, not cannot be replaced except in this circumstance, or maybe you can replace them in that circumstance, but you can't move it once it's there, right? But so besides how Mount Doom behaves, we also want to understand, how does this interact with other sites, and how should we alter the wording here so that it is more clear for sites moving forward. And one card that I want to call out here is a card called Nirn, which was released during a similar part of the era, right? Nirn states, while you control this site, each of your hunter minions is strength +1. And one of the things that I want to point out here is that in the comprehensive rules, if we go to the section for control, there's a line here that says the game text of a controlled site cannot be used by any player. So this is almost exactly analogous to what's going on with Mount Doom, that people are saying that you cannot play Mount Doom and use its ability while the Fellowship has not yet stepped on it. But we've got Nirn here that operates exactly the same way. The game text of a controlled site cannot be used by any player, and it says, while you control this site, each of your hunter minions is strength +1. Nirn only functions if this rule is bunk, right? And so how did they solve this? Well, what they did was they went ahead and they added a ruling specifically for Nirn, and they said the game text on this card remains active once it is controlled and is in your support area. It's a bit of a band-aid, but it makes it clear at least. And so the Legacy team has decided that is exactly what we're going to do for Mount Doom. To answer that first question, how does Mount Doom behave? We're going to make it real clear. The game text on this card goes into effect the moment it enters play, even if no player has yet moved to it. Okay? So this is exactly analogous to what's going on with Nirn. We're just going to make it so that now, the moment that it hits play, it now cannot be replaced. And then the question of what exactly do we do to the text that led us here. One of the decisions that we decided to do was to get rid of the term use in these sections, not just in active, but in that control section that I just went to. One of the things that we are going to be doing in the future is that we are going to be adding entries defining a lot of the terms that Decipher has left undefined. We're not yet at the point where we can really share that work, because it's gonna be a lot. But for now, we decided that this will probably work. What we're going to do is, instead of using the use functionality, the use terminology, which is not really defined anywhere. We're instead going to use does not apply. This is terminology that appears on various cards. Helpless is one of them. Return to his master is another. That is basically trying to say that, the game text has not gone away. We're just going to ignore it. And so that seemed like a better set of terminology for us to import. We know exactly how this applies to keywords, to effects, to special abilities, just because we know that that's how it's worked, right? This is something that people have been playing with for a long time. So we are going to be altering the active section in 2 places. Number 1, we're going to add this section of clarification. We're going to say sites are always active. A site's keywords are thus always available to be spotted while on the adventure path. A site's non-keyword game text does not apply unless the fellowship is at that site, although some cards may copy and use that game text. And then later on in that section, exception, site text does not apply when the starting fellowships are played. So once again, just unifying the language that's being used so that it's all using the same terminology. And then under control, this may be more or less making the NERN section, the NERN ruling obsolete, but we're going to include this anyway. It says the non-keyword game text of a controlled site does not apply unless that game text mentions that site being controlled. The keywords of a controlled site continue to apply. And so this just kind of unifies the language that's being used here. For the purposes of the legacy team, there's probably not going to be any additional situations that will arise here, but if they do, we will have these here for precedent. And then, of course, in the Players Council, we are going to be releasing more cards, more sites, more things that have to do with site control and whatever else. I'm sure that we will be referring back to these in the future when we are handling this. Okay, so that is that's those 3. So in the description of this video, like I said, I'm going to have a link to the blog post. This just goes over a quick summary of the actual results without going quite into so much detail. But I wanted to make sure that we had this video that will explain our thinking and sort of give you a crash course on all the stuff that's going on. So of course these are live on the wiki. You can go to the wiki and read these. You can also take a look at the upcoming rulings. I'll just show these real quick. So we're doing one for Harrowdale because that's hard to understand. We're doing another one for Whitehand Sieger. And then number 6, I believe, was Saruman's Staff. What the heck does the first sentence mean in situations where it's not obvious? And then the modern team is also taking a look at terrain. What does terrain keyword mean? So we're basically just making all these decisions and then making sure that they are put into 4.2. If you have any information that you'd like to bring to our attention, if there's a blog post that you remember, or if you just have a half-remembered conversation with someone from Decipher and you want to have that recorded for posterity, please let us know and we'll add it to that wiki page as a piece of evidence there. We expect that these rulings will probably be going into effect over the next week or so. We've got an errata batch on the PC side that we will be releasing, and so I think that it will make sense to have these go out at the same time. But yeah, that's it. So yeah, if you have any particular questions that you'd like to bring before the Rules Council, if you want us to take a look at a particular interaction or a combo, please go on to the PC Discord. We've got a rules questions section. You can always ask your question, and if it's something that looks particularly juicy, we may pull it in here, or if you want to make a formal request and just say, hey, can you please make a ruling on this? We'd be more than happy to. In some cases, we may even, come to the conclusion that nothing's going to change, right? Just because we're making a ruling doesn't mean that we are going to alter things. But having it on the record and having it linked here on the wiki so that you can send it to people. So if somebody says, hey, why does it work this way? You can say here, that is exactly why it works this way, the arguments that we used and the conclusion that we came to. And I just think that this will be a much better system than the sort of word of mouth, long argument process that was used before. Okay. Last chance to everyone in Twitch chat. Does anyone have any questions or anything you want to bring up before we close the stream? Going once, going twice. Muck says, this was great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I like how this has been turning out. I think that the system is starting to work, and I think this will be helpful for everybody, even if you're not necessarily all on board with everything that we're doing on the PC side of things. I think that this is going to help just unify the community a little better. So, all right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and close the stream. So thank you for tuning in, everybody. I'll have this uploaded on YouTube later today. Thanks. Peace.